In a nutshell, why is your client not guilty?
He's charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder, unintentional. And you not only have to have knowledge of that, but you have to have an intent to assist him in doing that. The difference is if you open a door for a bank robber, even if he's got the mask and you're not paying attention, you're not aiding and abetting the bank robber because you don't have an intent to commit a crime.
This is his fourth day as a cop.
Fourth day, yes.
A police department is ran like a military service. You have officers, you have experienced police officers, and then you have rookies, and you have officers that are on the job 4 days.
My client's down by his feet. Twice, he says, shall we roll him over? Because he's thinking maybe we should roll him over. He says he can't breathe. Well, roll him over. And Chauvin, the 20-year experienced police officer, said, no, he'll be all right this way. Now, you've got a 20-year officer here, and you got a 4-day officer in my client. He goes on, however, my client does, and says, I am worried about excited delirium or whatever. What's excited delirium? It's a situation where you've taken a lot of drugs and you get excited and you might die. That's what he was worried about. And then Chauvin says to my client again, that's why we have him on his stomach. I mean, put yourself in that position as a trained police officer who was trained by this guy. That was one of his training officers. And don't use your hindsight. You think he's under the influence of a drug. He did everything that he thought he was supposed to do. And he did more than that. He went into the ambulance, and he's the one that was doing CPR. He's a man of compassion. He's not a violent person. He's sorry the man died, but he doesn't believe that he was the cause of the death. He was not the cause. I think he feels good about that he was the one that asked to roll him over. He was the one that went in the ambulance.
Basic humanity would have required someone to step in.
And how something that looks so obviously wrong, forget about training. You don't need training to be a human being.
He had a duty to intervene, whatever the status of the other officer.
There's a duty to intervene, and there's also called human compassion.
What would you have done? He said twice, shall we roll him over?
You know what I would have done? I would have got up and I would have said, I'm really sorry, but this guy is dying in front of us, and I'm not going to be party to it. That's what a humane reaction would be.
That's very good. That's a very good hindsight, but you're not a police officer. He was following his belief that they were doing right.
Thomas
He was not believing in abetting
Thomas Lane.
crime.
OK, Thomas Lane is a police officer, of course, and I know that your argument is he was a rookie and had only done 4 shifts and he was up against a man who had 20 years of service. But underneath that man's knee was a man who was dying.
You and I probably have never seen a case where someone kneels on the throat of somebody as long as happened with George Floyd.
As to whether that what we saw for nearly 9 minutes.
Why didn't he get off the man?
He held his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes.
Against 4 police officers that have weapons and are kneeling on the neck of a man.
They must have heard George Floyd crying out 16 times in 5 minutes that he couldn't breathe. When you hear a human being, when you hear a human being say, I can't breathe.
I'm saying he's on the man's body and the guy's screaming, I want my mother, I'm going to die, they're going to kill me, I can't breathe.
Your client heard a man shout 16 times, I can't breathe. Get off him, he can't breathe. Your client was one of four police officers who held down George Floyd and rendered him unconscious, and carried on.
No, and anybody with common sense knows, for 9 minutes with your client assisting. Now, you don't need training to know that it was too much.
Isn't it awful to have an opinion about a black man being killed at the hands of your client?
Now you put the race issue into it, and there is no race issue here.
Really?
Two of the 4 officers, one is black and the other one's Asian. Answer that one. Answer that one.
I don't have to answer any one, do
Well,
I?
I don't have to answer anything to you either.
They're going to kill me. I can't breathe.
He also said, I can't breathe when they were trying to get him into the squad car. He used that at that time too. So should the police believe it? I don't know. My client's holding his feet. But what's compelling is when the ambulance comes, my client goes in the ambulance, 4 days on the force, goes in the ambulance and starts his own CPR, pushing down on his chest, which he did for a lengthy period of time until they got the machine out, attempting to revive Mr. Floyd. He didn't want to see the man die. Nobody would.
Does your client think that what Officer Chauvin did was wrong?
Saying officers are required to either stop or attempt to stop another sworn employee when force is being inappropriately applied or is no longer required.
He resisted then. He's lying on the ground. I agree. He said he can't breathe. And that is why my client said to Chauvin, should we roll him over? He said that twice.
Your client.
Mr. Gray has seen the body camera footage. We haven't. So remember that. Counsel says that the body camera footage shows that George Floyd resisted. We had all these different angles of him that show every aspect of this, not in full, but each phase. You never see any kind of resistance. You termed it not a violent type of resistance, but the kind of resistance you shouldn't do. Which was clearly evident in this arrest situation. Clearly evident how? Because with what we saw, Counselor, again, you got to give us the benefit of what we've seen. You don't see Floyd being violent or hostile or throwing people around. And when he's on the ground for many minutes, he's not moving at all except to ask for help. What are we missing? Well, I said that he was clearly under the influence of a drug, which he was because of the autopsy. Mr. Floyd shoved with his feet out towards where Officer Chauvin was, and he ended up outside on the other side of the squad car on the door, by the sidewalk. 4 police officers couldn't get one guy who's handcuffed behind his back into a squad car. Yes, well, they did get him in there, but it wasn't easy because he was fighting. He was handcuffed, but he's 6 foot. I think he's 6'2", and he was, he had the build of a bodybuilder. But there are 4 cops. And Counselor, they wind up with him on the floor with his hands behind his back and that's correct. And a knee on the neck.
Well, you've seen the video, right?
Mike, yes, I saw the video. Yes.
So, I mean, what's to do that? But I've got to say, I'm slightly aghast that you represent one of the 4 police officers involved in this case, and you say you haven't looked at that video properly to assess whether Derek Chauvin may have been responsible.
I did not say I had not looked at the video.
It sounds like you're arguing that, he didn't know any better.
He was relying on his training as a police officer and following the directions of a training officer. Chauvin was also a training officer.
So you're saying, was he following orders?
He was doing what he thought was right.
I don't need
Your client pulled a gun. Your client pulled a gun on George Floyd 90 seconds after he first met him. Why did he do that?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because he did not show his hands. Once he put his hands on his steering wheel, he put the gun in his holster. Why did he do that? Because now his hands were shown. They're on the steering wheel. Mr. Floyd did not show his hands. He put his right hand down below the seat, which is clear evidence for my client that he might be going to grab a gun or hide drugs. So my client told him, let me see both of your hands. And he pulled out his gun. There was a pause. He didn't show his hands right away, but then he put both of his hands on the steering wheel. As soon as he did that, Mr. Como, my client put his gun in his holster.
Do you realise that your whole performance here merely tells the world how disgusting, actually, even the people representing these police officers are?
Well, thank you for the compliment, because if you
it wasn't a compliment.
Oh, really? I thought it was.
Battleship Sun. Battleship Sun. Battleship Sun. Battleship Sun.
That he had a duty to intervene, whatever the status of the other officer.
You obviously are very opinionated and biased. What you do not understand is what goes through the head of a police officer on his fourth day. Good night. Happy birthday.
Look, everybody is entitled to legal representation.
You know what? Yeah, he needs another lawyer, and that guy shouldn't be practicing law.
But
that was one of the most disgraceful interviews I've ever watched with a lawyer, probably in my entire career.
Yeah, that was quite an extraordinary interview.
Absolutely disgraceful.
Just one real quick comment. Okay. I heard your father give a speech over 50 years ago, and it was the best speech I ever heard. That's just to let you know.
Counselor, thank you very much. Thank God he's not here to see this, because I think he'd be shocked at what's going on in this system and what people are paying attention to.
I agree.
Yeah, all right. I'm glad you think it's funny. Listen, none of this is funny, but this is a window into what you're going to see going forward. And there's nothing for us to be smiling about. It's what my father spent his whole life fighting against. And now we have to fight against it together. Justice is fairness under law. You need to see what this case is going to be based on. There can be no fairness in this society without it. I'll be right back.
But if all of these people say, why didn't my client intercede? Well, if the public is there and they're so in an uproar about this, they didn't intercede either.
Passers-by were shouting at the police officers, "Get off him! He can't breathe." They were further away. They were further away than your client was.
Let me ask you another question. Why didn't any of the other people standing there intervene? If you're saying anybody should have intervened.
Why didn't your...
And he did not intervene. And the idea that the civilians should have rushed in to a policing situation in the inner city of Minneapolis against 4 police officers that have weapons and are kneeling on the neck of a man. Don't you think that's asking a little much of civilians and a little too little of your client?
Absolutely. I just brought that up. But what you say is that he's a foot away. Look at the video. He's got his feet was murdered. That's what he said. He didn't say 4. He said by one of our police officers. What kind of comment is that by any politician who has any semblance of fairness to give one of his employees, a police officer,